So, in recent news, as we know, Donald Trump announced his cabinet positions for the US government. And we thought to come up with a different list of who we would think, past and present, make the ideal candidate under different situation. So, Cooper, are you ready for this list coming up?
Uh, I think I've developed a pretty good list. You gave me at least some leeway in terms of time to actually come up with some people, because if I had to come up with this list on the top of my head, this would be a nightmare. So, especially, past, present, living or dead, I think we were able to create a pretty good list of some people that might be able to fill these cabinet positions and be quite effective. So I'm ready to go.
Yeah. I mean, generally, we would want to make these decisions, but we can't. But this is our kind of mock trial. But I'm going to
It's
start.
the next best thing is the hypothetical fun scenario.
Yeah,
If you could pick anyone ever in
yeah.
history, who would this be? And I have taken some liberties, and just to preface, you do not know the people I've named on this list. Um, but there is some people that have passed away. There's some people that are modern, maybe an American, maybe non-American. So you never know.
Yeah.
They can always become American citizens later. So
Yeah. And if the Trump administration's watching this is what you could have had as your chiefs of staffs. But okay, regardless, let's start. Okay, Ambassador of the United Nations, Cooper. Who's your first pick right there?
all right. If I was going to pick one person to be the ambassador of the United Nations, this is an old pick, and this is the pick I refer to. Non-American. I'm taking um, Winston Churchill. Now, I'm taking
Ooh.
Winston Churchill actually for because at first he was pro the United Nations, but then after a long time of seeing how ineffective it was, he became highly against the United Nations and basically called for its expansion. That and his really good forward thinking progress on the Soviet Union, I think someone that could really like tear up stuff and realize that this whole place is terrible and nonsense, and I'm okay with tearing it down. I booked Winston Churchill to be in charge of the United Nations. And also, he's such a great speaker, too. And so you want someone to be articulate and be able to talk very well and stuff like that. So I think that was a pretty good choice.
Oh yeah. And I think I remember a quote Winston Churchill said. He said, after the end of the war, after VE Day, Victory in Europe Day, he was like, I think we should go all the way up to Moscow. I don't think we're done in Berlin. I think we should go all the way to Moscow. So maybe
Yeah.
we listen to him. We would avoid a lot of problems
That
today.
was the same thing him and Patton agreed on, that they should just keep going all the way to Moscow. And hey, we've been fighting communism ever since. So who
Yeah.
knows if it was a good idea, but
Yeah.
maybe. You don't know.
I don't know if this is a spoiler alert, but I remember, I don't know if you picked Douglas MacArthur. He was like the general in Asia when the general
Mm-hmm.
in Europe was Dwight Eisenhower. But I remember he said because he was the head of the Korean War of the Americans, and he was like, "Why don't we nuke the hell out of China?" Imagine what would happen if we'd done that. That would have been, yeah,
That one's a harder sell to sell on, but you know what?
yeah,
It's hard. It's hard to armchair quarterback that. But all right, give me your next one.
yeah. I'll give you the next one. Okay, this is an important one, so I hope you thought about this a little bit. Secretary of State.
Secretary of State. This one, very similar concept in terms of position. They handle basically all the foreign affairs relationships that the president does. I'm going with George Kennan. If you're not familiar with George Kennan, he used to be the ambassador to a bunch of different states, including the Soviet Union. And he's the individual that is most famous for creating the Long Telegram, which, if you haven't read the Long Telegram, it is a remarkable piece of writing that perfectly encapsulates the entirety of the Cold War, and basically in a single letter describes exactly the motivations of the West and the East, and basically says exactly what's going to happen. So he had the insight to know exactly how different foreign nations were actually going to act, and how they act in their own self-interest. And so his mental acuity and understanding the other perspectives of the state of the places that he was, because he was in Germany. I think he lived in Germany for a long time. Um, and then the Soviet Union was witnessing Stalin during the height of his time and stuff like that. So I think him being able to understand foreign policy the best, I think he would be the best choice as a Secretary of State.
Yeah, Kennan's brilliant. I mean, going off of what you said, he came up with containment theory, which is pretty much the staple of, I think, of the long telegram you're talking about, and pretty much what we saw in the Cold War era, how we handled foreign affairs, in terms of like countering Soviet and communist influence in, Asia, Latin America, and Europe through, not only military means, which I think we don't really talk about much, we try to think that the only way of stopping communism is by putting military forces, but I think he came up with a foresight of that. Oh, we don't only it's not only a military problem, but it's an ideological problem, it's an economic problem, so we have to give economic support, we have to give political support. So I mean, yeah, great pick, Cooper, great pick. So I'm just going to come
Of
up with
course.
I'm gonna come up with the next one on the list. This one is I don't think I'll be surprised on this list. I think we'll both agree on this. I think it'll be pretty funny too. Secretary of Education. Who do you got there, Cooper?
I don't think you're going to pick this list. I actually took a lot of thought into what I would do. Obviously, if I had a choice, I would abolish the Department of Education.
Yeah.
But if I had to put someone in there, this is a very old one. Booker T. Washington. If you're not familiar with Booker T. Washington, I highly recommend reading some of his biographies and his story. So he was a slave as a child, was able freed, and then was able to open up a school, and was this like tremendous aspiration for his community and creating education for all these people. And so, if you're not familiar with him, look up Booker T. Washington, read his books. There's a great series, I believe, on Daily Wire called Forgotten Heroes, something like that. I think it's an audio only like podcast type. And there's one on Booker T. Washington, and it is incredible. So if you haven't known about him, look into him. He's like, if you're gonna have one person in charge of educating people who is one of the most moral people that you can think of, then you can't get better than Booker T. Washington.
Yeah, actually, I was not thinking
And
we were
so
gonna.
that'd be my pick.
I was actually not thinking we were gonna go with that pick. I actually think it's a pretty smart pick.
Mm-hmm.
Just thinking about what he did for black people at the time. Because a lot of them couldn't have a regular education, right? And he made them like apprenticeships, like like more like labor jobs, but like stuff that were stable. Yeah, he did really. I think that's actually a really good pick, Cooper. I
Yeah,
definitely agree on that. Just another
throwing
one.
curveballs.
That was a little bit of a curveball. I was not thinking about that one. We're going to different parts of history right here. But
Yeah.
another one I think is an important cabinet position, especially what we see in recent news, but especially what we saw during the Biden administration, how they handled with Trump in like the bad way they did that, and also the controversy with Matt Gaetz. And I think you know what I'm going to be talking about right now, Attorney General.
Yeah.
So
This was
who's
a
your
hard
pick?
one for me. So I had to look back in history on some of the people that I thought were probably some of the best attorney generals. And I did cheat a little bit. I did pick a former attorney general.
Okay.
If you know of Edward Meese, he was the attorney general under Ronald Reagan.
Okay.
He now currently does great work for the Heritage Foundation and has a whole department associated with them. So I'm sorry, this was a hard list. I didn't have a ton of time to think of everything. But in terms of some of the past, is someone that I think that, especially under probably the most conservative administration that we've had in a long time, I don't think Edward McKees is any slouch at all. I think he's would be a terrific example, and I think he was a terrific example as Attorney General. And so, I'm copping out to say he was already an Attorney General, but I would pick him if I had the choice.
Like, what are like any like specific reasons why? I mean, like how did he handle law enforcement back in the 80s with Reagan? That was like
Well, you have to know like the changing of times, right? So you're going from the 70s into the
right, right.
80s, and there was a huge boom in obviously prosperity economically, and also in terms of safety of the world too. There was crime. That was basically the start of the big reduction of crime. Crime had been reducing for a while, last 100 years at that point, but there was a big reduction at the point in the 80s, and then we see it basically that trend continue all the way up until the basically the 2020s when we saw crime actually increase a little bit. But it was the start of this pretty dramatic trend of regular crime going down. So in terms of someone, especially in that time too, you're not going to have somebody that's going to break apart the Department of
Right.
Justice like we were seeing in the Biden administration.
Right.
And then also people that are looking to just purely focus on revenge for
Right.
the injustices the DOJ was doing in the
Right.
prior administration. You don't want retaliation like that. You don't want, you take my eye, I take your head type thing. You
Right.
want you want some civility. You want some people probably coming back from a civiler time, I would say, in society. So
Yeah. Yeah, you want a guy to bring kind of some stability rather than,
yeah,
yeah, just continue the disarray and dysfunction of the DOJ. No, I think that's a good, effective choice right there. Just changing from law enforcement into foreign affairs, what we're talking about. Why don't we go to a more maybe economic route, maybe some financial pick right here? Secretary of Treasury. Who you got, Cooper?
I think this is the only one that we're gonna have actually aligned. If you're gonna think, we're going with Milton Friedman. All right,
I love him.
great American economist, understood the free market, understood the dangers of a centralized banking system.
Yeah.
Big, most probably classic conservative economics you could think of. And so there's basically easy pick who you're going to pick. You're going to pick Milton Friedman. That's an easy one. So I feel like that's something that you would have also thought of as well.
Oh yeah, 100%. Actually, though, I would. I mean, maybe you can make him two positions. I would actually have him. I'm not going to spoil it, but a later one we're talking about. But yeah, I mean, the man, his whole basis was the theory on the importance of globalization and free market economy around the world. I mean, yeah, I think that would have make a great pick. I would definitely do not disagree with you there. Uh, how about changing a little route a little bit? Department of Defense. Who you got here?
Department of Defense, this is an interesting one. I'm
Yeah.
taking someone that was in a more prestigious position. I'm bringing them back down a little bit. I'm going Dwight D. Eisenhower, actually, as the Department of Defense.
Oh,
Now, obviously, he was one of the most main pivotal generals during World War II.
yeah.
He also, his personality as a general was very, very different than it was when he was president. As president, he was much more calm, much more um, basically forgiving almost
Right.
in terms of his relationships with other um, adversarial states.
Mm.
But as the general, Dwight D. Eisenhower did not like to lose. And he did not like to lose this, for the same reason twice. And so he never made the same mistake twice. And you could take that to the bank. And he also had a pretty big temper as well. And so if I was going to put someone in charge of keeping the national security defense, um, I think Dwight D. Eisenhower would have been the next best position he could have been in, aside from being president at the time. I think being in the Department of Defense would suit him flawlessly.
Yeah, I think it's interesting the route you go because I would actually think, Dwight Eisenhower, great person, great individual. He wanted to combat a lot of the corruption embedded within the federal government. Specifically when you're talking about the influence with the arms industry and government. So, like, when people talk about, I forgot that word, but when people talk about the financial interests and how people in government, in the federal government, go to a private company, and then sometimes people in private go to government. That he wanted to get rid of that, and that's what he said in his farewell address. So I think that's a great choice. When we're talking about, like, our current, it's an interesting because it's an interesting point because Dwight D. Eisenhower was obviously kind of like, the head man in World War II. So he's like an obvious choice. Like when we talk about like who's the secession and as a Department of Defense, and we look at Trump's pick. Now that again, that was another pick. We could go Matt Gaetz. We could go on Tulsi Gabbard as controversial picks. But Pete Hegseth, who I think is a great pick, but he was also a Fox News correspondent, and he didn't really have a high position within the military before retiring. Wasn't he like a lieutenant or something?
Don't quote me on it. I think it was more prestigious than that, but don't quote me exactly what his ranking was.
But again, it's kind of like, that's is an interesting route Trump's going. But again, I think it's the same kind of like a personality, someone who really wants to do good for the country and get rid of like the injustice and the corruption.
I believe he was
Government.
also. I believe he's
Yeah,
won a Bronze Star as well.
I'm sorry.
So he's had some accolades in the military for sure. So
Right. Yeah, but he hasn't been long enough to be corrupted by the bureaucracy aspect of it. So that's
Oh
why.
yeah.
Yeah, right. Exactly. That's why I think he was a good pick. And Dwight D. Eisenhower again was someone who had a lot of credibility and he always spoke the truth. And that's why I think would also made a great pick when you mentioned his name. Again, okay. So we went with a lot. Like this is going to be the last one. We went with a lot.
Yeah.
Ambassador of the United Nations, Secretary of State, Secretary of Education, Attorney General, Secretary of Treasury, Department of Defense. Now, I made a little spoiler before. I was talking about that pick. What was his name? The economist, Milton Friedman. And I say I want him to be in this department. And this is a new department. It was constructed by Donald Trump and a couple other individuals. I mean, I know you're going to guess it, but I want to see, let's see if other people will. If you're in the comment section and guess what it is before we say it, then put in the comment section. But this is the last one, Department of Government Efficiency. Now we know Elon Musk, Vivek Ramaswamy have been appointed as the new personnel in this agency. But Cooper, if in the ideal world, who would you have in this department?
No, I'm not. No, I'm not believing that this is an actual department that requires actual appointings, but they're basically going to be an advisory body. But for probably the most important thing you can ever think of, right? Dismantling the government. And so I'm very very excited for the possibilities of Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy and what they're able to do with this. I think personally, Elon Musk is a fantastic pick, especially only because you understand. Taking Twitter as an example, he was able to fire 80% of the people and create an even better product than existed before. He has all his companies are basically, particularly SpaceX, is all about efficiency, right? Making the cargo cost of sending things into space way cheaper and way more efficient by creating reusable rockets. So he definitely has a lot of interesting insight in this. Vivek Ramaswamy, little different, but if I'm not going to pick Elon Musk because I believe that's the cop out pick. But the next most popular pick that everyone's going to want to say is Ron Paul, right? Ron Paul, the person
There you go. Yeah.
who is the hardest core person that you can think of that wants to dismantle every aspect of the government. I would put him in charge. And while he might not get everything he wants, I would rather have someone that's willing to tear down a little bit too much than keep more than it's supposed to.
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, honestly, I love Ron Paul. I mean, honestly, all those choices are great. Elon Musk, Vivek Ramaswamy. My choice, again, a little spoiler, Milton Friedman. And I'll tell you what mine, but I'll tell you why. But the dark horse candidate, who I would say, it seems like they might be taking a hand out of the playbook, is Javier Milei, what he's doing in Argentina. And I
Yeah.
see what he like. I love that video Javier Milei had when he was like saying like well, obviously in Spanish. He's now the president of Argentina, but he was like I'm gonna get rid of like he had a name. And he's like just threw out the name after he read it and threw it out like the Department of Feminism or something. Just threw it out. Department of like Commerce or something threw it out. It was awesome. But
Oh,
the
yeah.
reason why the reason why I say Milton Friedman is because I actually think the Treasury is actually great. I think you can have them both. But the reason why I think this quasi position is because there was actually a video Elon Musk posted, and it seems like this is kind of his plan for what he's going to want to do in this cabinet role. I mean, this kind of cabinet role he has. But he had a video of like him talking about like what cabinet position, like what kind of departments are actually necessary. And he was only talking about there's only certain ones that are actually important because Milton Friedman was only talking about the only really necessary role of government is to keep people safe and protect the interests of the country. So he said Department of Defense, but he was outlining different like departments, like the Department of Housing and Development and the Department of Commerce, like how you can really just get rid of those because they're not necessary. The federal government should be having a role in that. And I thought that was quite interesting. And I think ideal world, like why don't we just get all these geniuses together, right? But I mean we don't have that option. And frankly, this is like our all-star picks, but perhaps in the future, in our ideal world, we have geniuses come together like this. But for right now, this is just our picks. And yeah, it was great talking today, Cooper.
Yeah, I always enjoy these fun games. So if you ever have any more ideas with any other fun, interesting topics that we want to discuss, then we'd love to hear about it more. But thanks, Zach. Always appreciate it.